Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and hi. It is the 27th day of Ramadan and we are nearing the final few days. And before I begin, I just wanted to say a huge jazakallah khair for having followed the reminders for Rijal series this far. So my name is Aisha Wahab and I am a second year visual communication student from Leeds Arts University. And the verse I would like to talk about today is one from Surah Al-Hadid, and it will surround the topic of finding contentment in Allah, inshallah. So I particularly chose this ayat because number one, it acts as an important reminder to help keep us grounded as we slowly exit the holy month of Ramadan. And number two is that I think it's because the implications of finding contentment in Allah would solve so many of the social, economical, political, and environmental issues which we face today, since the ayah really puts things into perspective. And so the verse goes, "Know that the life of this world is but amusement, and diversion, and adornment, and boasting to one another, and competition in increase of wealth and children. Like the example of a rain, whose resulting plant growth pleases the tillers. Then it dries and you see it turn yellow, and then it becomes scattered debris." So I'll stop halfway because it is quite a long verse, but the first bit of the line describes life as this continuous process of pursuing one thing after the other, and which is led by our wants and needs of that particular time. And I quite like the way that Noman Ali Khan interpreted it, where these pursuits and desires run in parallel to the course of our lives. And it begins from the time when we are little, where our pursuit is largely amusement, that is, to play. And then it moves into middle school or secondary school, where we've entered our rebellious phase, and which is described to be a time of diversion. And then next is high school, a time where we become more concerned by the way we look, more concerned with love interest, so in pursuit of adornment. And the next stage is where we are now, where we are in the midst of gaining the necessary skills and knowledge, and we worked pretty hard to get to where we are, and we want to be able to talk about them because we're proud of our achievements this far. So like, where did you go to university? What grades did you get? Where did you do your internship? A phase that is described as boasting to one another. And lastly, when we have fully entered the work life, the only thing left to do is just to accumulate more wealth and subsequently children, so that we could pass this on to them. And then this phase in our life is described in the verse as competition and increase of wealth and children. And all of these pursuits are then contrasted with an analogy of a tiller or a farmer who works tirelessly to get his or her vegetables to grow. The same way, when we really want something, we'll work hard to get it. So when you're a child, you build these complex things with your toys because it amuses you to do so. When you're in high school, you stay up all night studying because you want to get good grades. When you're working, you work overtime because doing so helps you progress more in your career. So it is this transition from one thing to the next. But then once we do obtain the thing that we strive towards, the satisfaction wears off. It turns yellow, and it gradually becomes less valuable because the thing that we desired before has now been replaced by a new desire. And life is this endless chase of one thing after the next. And the more we chase after them, the more attached we can become to these rewards and the prospect of gaining even more. And subsequently, the more blurry our endpoint becomes. The ayah then continues, "And in the hereafter is severe punishment and forgiveness from Allah and approval. And what is the worldly life except the enjoyment of delusion?" So Allah reminds us the endpoint, and which is the hereafter, and that the ultimate contentment that we should strive for are not simply the ones of this dunya. It is not wealth, power, status, love, but it really is the forgiveness and blessing of Allah, so that we may enter His Jannatul Firdaus, inshallah, which is described as a place with gardens underneath which rivers flow. And this life is really just a means to get there, because realistically, you do need all of these things that you strive towards. Things like, you do need them as a form of sustenance. Things like money, education, relationships. But what tends to happen is that these things, which are really forms of blessings from Allah, then becomes a distraction for us from worshipping Him. There is a tendency to acknowledge His creation more than the Creator Himself, because in the midst of all this, you forget that these things you have are only made possible through the love and generosity of Allah. And it simply is not possible to find contentment purely from worldly pursuits, because they are not built to last. You'll be happy now, but when you lose it, you won't be as happy anymore. And the only entity that does last is Allah and our ties to Him. And therefore, that is the contentment that we should do our best to seek. And I really wanted to point this out, because when I try to make sense of the world and all of its issues, because there's a lot of them, I found that the source of these issues can be largely attributed to our excessive attachment to these rewards or delusions of the dunya. Issues like corruption and war, where it really is just an attachment to power, and forgetting that power ultimately is Allah's sole authority. And issues like climate change, which is really a result of sustained economic growth and a corporation's obsession with profit and a consumer's obsession with wanting more, and without really caring about its environmental impacts, and which Allah has continually mentioned in the Quran about the need to preserve our surroundings. And issues like wealth inequality, which is due to our attachment to money and wealth, and wanting to keep it all to ourselves, even when there are so many others out there who are much more in need of it. Individuals like orphans, homeless people that you see on the streets, refugees who have to fled their homes. In Surah Al-Fajr, Allah describes the Fir'auns, the Tamuds, and the Ads, who were very innovative and very wealthy people. But with all of those resources, they did not honor the orphans or feed the poor. They instead became blinded by their blessings. So it is important to acknowledge the things we have right now as blessings from Allah. Things like the ability to speak, the plants and flowers in spring that make you happy, the food that you have on the table, the knowledge that you gain every single day, the friends and family which Allah has very neatly arranged around you. And the more that we recognize where these rizqis come from and who gave us this sustenance, the more we will want to put them to good use, inshallah, to do things for His sake and to gain His ultimate reward. So with all this being said, I pray that every single one of us may be able to kind of detach ourselves from the delusions of this world and instead find contentment in Allah and Allah alone. So that is all from me. Yeah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.